Hi everyone. Well, as you can tell by the background, we are in the yard, and for me it's always a satisfying feeling to know that we've brought the boat back safe and sound, no major mishaps, no breakdowns, and we've had a great sailing season. Now we have a bunch of projects. When we left Punta Mangles on the Baja side, we were pretty sure we would shortly be crossing to Guaymas. After our previous close encounter with the rocks a couple days before, this time we stayed well offshore of the colorful escarpments and aimed the bow to the prominent landmark of Punta Pulpito, bypassing the popular anchorage of San Juanico in favor of gaining a little more northing for our crossing. Knowing that Punta Pulpito would be our last Baja anchorage, our stay was bittersweet. We knew we had to cross the sea and eventually head to the United States because of our expiring visas, but we did not want to leave the beauty of Baja behind. Like Punta Mangles, the shores of this anchorage are rock-strewn, but even more so. One of the features of Punta Pulpito is the hiking trails, which Lee and Blondie availed themselves of. They were rewarded with spectacular views north toward the entrance of Bahia Concepcion and Punta Chivato, and an eagle's view of the anchorage itself, which provides only moderate protection from northerlies. Our crossing to Guaymas will not be remembered as a memorable crossing. Initially, we were not too concerned when the wind was more northeasterly than predicted, causing us to sail below our rum line, as a southerly was predicted to fill in by late afternoon. However, the wind continued to head us, and eventually the head sails were taken in. The southerly never materialized, but luckily the wind moderated, and we passed the night motoring into the breeze. At sunrise, the headlands of Cabo Aro were in sight. We elected to join friends who were staying at Mero and tied up at the deteriorating docks, as there were no slips available at Fonatur. In years past, we have stayed at El Mero and have many lovely memories of our time spent there. Blondie can come and go as she likes, and everything is very laid back. Unfortunately, the present government has not made any significant long-lasting repairs to the docks. Last September, when Hurricane K moved up the Pacific coast, it generated a large southerly swell in the Sea of Cortez, which funneled right up the inlet at El Mero to float docks off pilings. An acquaintance related to us the harrowing wave conditions and having to fend off floating docks to prevent damage to his boat. An abandoned boat, which was tied off at an outer dock, broke loose and sank sideways to the docks, and all of the docks have sustained some type of damage. The usable dock space has shrunk, and there is no longer a charge for staying at the docks. I, for one, would not mind paying if only the docks were maintained. Despite the occasional smell from the sardine plant when the wind blows in a certain direction, it is a lovely spot. A week before we arrived at El Mero, Lee contacted Jabsco, our water pump manufacturer, and learned the pump had been manufactured in 2013. Over the previous 2 months, we had noticed the pump seemed to labor longer to pump a volume of water, and there was a steady decline in water pressure. After some troubleshooting, the technician suggested our problem might simply be a dirty check valve assembly, which could be resolved by cleaning the check valve in warm, soapy water. Lee delayed any action until a time when having water readily available was not critical. As it turned out, Lee made a good call. Cleaning the check valve assembly did not work, and in fact, while the motor labored, it could not produce any pressure. A water pump is on the list of things to bring back from the U.S. We used a hand-bilge water pump that is infrequently used for pumping excess water out of the dinghy, and we pumped water out of our water tanks and into a dedicated water jerry can. It really made us appreciate the convenience of water that flows out of the tap. We were scheduled for an 8 a.m. haul-out at Marina Guaymas, also known as Gabriel's. We slowly motored through the harbor of Guaymas, and it was sad that this spring's journey was coming to an end. But as we got closer to the yard, I had to start paying strict attention to the depth sounder. We were arriving near the top of a rising tide, and I followed the depth markings on Navionics, which closely matches a course I was taught by a local sailor. Still, it was a little uncomfortable when the depth sounder slowly moved from 10 feet to 8, and it was a relief to arrive at the yard slip and to see Roberto ready to take our lines. Once La Brisa was up on the stands in the work yard, we began the task of preparing her for her lonely summer stay in the yard. On calm mornings, sails were hosed off, dried, flaked, and put into sail bags, except for the main, with its full battens, which we rolled up. This year, instead of putting the main into the cabin and having it block the aisle, Lee rented a storage locker, which also houses the kayak, sail bags, folded-up dodger, and other items. Lines were washed and dried, and it was around this time that Lee tested positive for COVID. He was under the weather for a few days, and in spite of the close confines of our boat, I managed to fight it off and never tested positive. We are so very grateful for the vaccine and boosters. Some people use foil on their ports to prevent excessive heating of the cabin by the sun. I prefer to use window shades, which attach with Velcro, and which we also use in marinas when we want privacy. I sanded or scuffed the topside varnished surfaces and applied a coat of varnish. That hopefully will ensure our varnished surfaces will be in reasonable shape after a summer of intense sun. Lockers were cleaned out and perishable foods given to the yard workers. Other boaters, too, were calling an end to their sailing season, and the yard was beginning to fill up. Wide catamarans and larger, heavier monohulls are lifted with the large travel lift from the shipyard next door. The morning before our visas were due to expire, La Brisa was moved to the storage yard. I walked among the boats and saw so many familiar names, such as Nick and Ika's Serendipity and John and Christie's Imaloa. It was so hard to leave La Brisa, and I wished we didn't have to go. We crossed the border that evening, and before going on to California, we spent several days camping in the wilds of Arizona, making sure we would not be bringing COVID to family. The next time we check in with you will be in June from Kodiak Island, Alaska, where we will continue our Sailboat Cove Chronicles and life off the grid with John and Christy. So, until then,